On the 17th of April 1969, the British motoring weekly Autocar ran its road test of the new Triumph TR6. The conclusion was brief and unambiguous. It was, the magazine declared, the last of the real sports cars. At the time, that may have read as high praise. With the benefit of 55 years of hindsight, it reads rather more like a verdict. The TR6 was a car built on a tight budget by a struggling British motor company, styled not by Triumph's own designers or even by the Italian firms who had shaped the earlier TR models, but by the German coach builder Karmann, who were asked to make the existing TR5 look fresh without touching anything fundamental underneath. The chassis, the doors, the windscreen surround, the engine, the running gear, all carried over. The investment was in new front and rear panels. The bones of the car could trace their lineage directly back to the TR2 of 1953. In 16 years, the basic architecture had not materially changed, and yet the result was 94,619 cars sold, more than any previous TR model. An export success so disproportionate that only 8,370 examples stayed in Britain, while 83,480 crossed the Atlantic to America. A car that Motor Magazine in its 1969 road test called smooth and potent, and probably the best value for money in open-top terms. A car that Autocar's test confirmed could reach 120 miles per hour and sprint from 0 to 60 in 8.2 seconds. A car whose straight-six engine sang, as one writer in Autocar put it, a tune that was music to anyone's ears. And a car that, for all that success, could not save the brand that built it, because the formula that made it so compelling to buyers in 1969 was precisely the formula that British Leyland's management decided was finished. In replacing the TR6 with the TR7, Triumph threw away everything that had made its sports cars matter. The TR6 did not kill Triumph, but its replacement did. Today we are telling both stories. Section 1. Britain in 1969, and the heritage that made the TR6. To understand the TR6, you need to understand the tradition it was completing. The TR range had begun with the TR2 in 1953, a Spartan, fast, two-seat roadster built specifically to attract American buyers who wanted British sports car character at a price that felt accessible alongside the homegrown alternatives of the era. The TR2 was sold in the United States for less than $2,000. It was basic, noisy, imperfect, and enormously appealing to a particular kind of buyer who valued driving involvement over refinement. That buyer had grown up with the TR, the TR3, the TR4, with its Michelati styling and independent rear suspension on the TR4A, the short-lived TR5 with its Lucas mechanical fuel injection and 150 brake horsepower. Each iteration had added capability while retaining the essential character. The TR6 was the sixth generation of a formula that had been selling to America in serious numbers for 15 years, and the American TR customer knew exactly what he was getting: a rear-wheel drive, open two-seater with a straight-six engine, wood-veneered dashboard, proper instrumentation, and the kind of noise and feel that Japanese and German competitors of the period were carefully engineering out of their own cars. Britain in 1969 was a country in the middle of considerable turbulence, the economic difficulties of the Wilson government, the beginning of what would become a decade of industrial relations problems in the car industry, and the looming reorganization that would create British Leyland from the wreckage of the British Motor Corporation and the Leyland Motor Corporation. Triumph had been absorbed into Leyland in 1960, and by 1969 was operating within a corporate structure of extraordinary complexity, competing with its own stablemates for resources, investment, and management attention. The budget for the TR6 reskin was, as Bill Piggott recorded in his authoritative originality guide Triumph TR, super tight, and the result, extraordinary as it seems, was arguably better than the car it replaced. Section 2. The Karmann restyle, a tight budget, and a happy accident. The decision to hand the TR6's exterior to Karmann was born of necessity. Giovanni Michelotti, the Italian designer who had styled the TR4 through TR5, was unavailable. The budget did not allow for a clean sheet redesign. Triumph needed a fresh look, quickly, without disturbing the mechanicals underneath. Carmen took the TR5 center section doors, windscreen surround, body tub, and gave it a completely new front and rear treatment. What they produced was, by any measure, striking. Where the TR5 and TR4 had been rounded and somewhat soft in their lines, the TR6 was angular and squared off. The front end was wider and more purposeful. The rear was cut off in what styling parlance of the time called a calm tail, a flat, abrupt truncation that was simultaneously more practical and more aggressive-looking than the curved boot it replaced. The result gave the car a presence on the road that the earlier TRs, for all their engineering integrity, had never quite achieved. The rear panel was painted black as standard, giving the optical impression of extra width. Wider wheels filled the arches more convincingly. An enlarged front anti-roll bar insisted upon by Triumph's chassis engineer Spen King brought the handling into line, producing an understeering tendency under extreme cornering that was considerably more predictable than the TR5's occasional waywardness. Motor Magazine's 1969 road test achieved a top speed of 117 miles per hour, 0 to 60, in 8.5 seconds. Overall fuel consumption of 20.8 miles per gallon, and a touring figure of 28 miles per gallon. The magazine's conclusion was enthusiastic. Smooth and potent, they wrote. A nice blend of old He-Man feel and up-to-date behavior. They considered it probably the best value for money, in open-top terms. The 1969 U.S. base price was $3,300. Against the competition available at that price, the TR6 offered something genuinely rare, a proper, straight-six engine, full four-wheel independent suspension, rack and pinion steering, front disc brakes, a polished walnut dashboard, and a character that no Japanese competitor was yet in a position to replicate. The first production TR6 was built on the 19th of September 1968 as a 1969 model year vehicle. The first cars carried over the Roadster wheel covers from the TR5 and had a unique steering wheel and magnetic petrol filler cap not continued into later production. These very earliest examples are the most collectible today, though the differences to subsequent cars are modest. Section 3. The engine. One car. Two completely different experiences. The single most important thing to understand about the Triumph TR6 is that there were, in practical terms, two entirely different cars sold under the same name. The distinction was the engine, and the reason for the distinction was America. In the United Kingdom and most other world markets, the TR6 was powered by the 2,498 cubic centimeter inline six-cylinder engine with Lucas mechanical fuel injection, the same system first used in the TR5, which had been claimed as the first petrol injection system fitted to a British production car. In this specification, the engine produced 150 brake horsepower and 164 pound-feet of torque in the early CP commission numbered cars, giving the car confirmed performance of 0 to 60 miles per hour in 8.2 seconds and a top speed of 120 miles per hour as measured by Autocar magazine. These are genuinely compelling figures for a 1969 sports car at this price. In the United States, emissions legislation made the Lucas injection system impractical. The high cost of the unit would have priced the car uncompetitively, and the compression ratio required for the injection engine was incompatible with the lower-octane unleaded fuels that American regulations were beginning to mandate. U.S. market TR6s used twin Zenith Stromberg carburetors, a lower compression ratio, and produced 104 net brake horsepower, roughly the same figure as the British car, but measured by a different standard that made it appear considerably less impressive than the 150 brake horsepower advertised for the home market car. The practical performance difference was real, but not as dramatic as the numbers suggested. American customers got a top speed of 107 miles per hour and a somewhat more relaxed character, but not a fundamentally different car. The important distinction for those considering ownership today is the provenance of the injection system on UK cars. The Lucas mechanical fuel injection fitted to the TR6 has attracted a considerable reputation for unreliability, some of it earned, some of it significantly overstated. The actual mechanical pump is sound engineering. The weakness, as Haggerty's UK technical coverage makes clear, was the original Lucas fuel pump, which was prone to vaporizing on hot days and losing pressure. Most surviving UK market TR6s have long since had the Lucas pump replaced by a Bosch unit, which effectively eliminates the problem. The injection system, once properly serviced and with a functioning pump, is described by those who have worked with it as a thing of loveliness, delivering strong, progressive power delivery and a characterful throttle response that the carburetted American cars cannot quite match. In 1973, the fuel-injected engine was detuned from 150 brake horsepower to 125, primarily through a milder camshaft and changes to the injection pump. This was to improve low-speed tractability and make the car easier to drive in urban traffic, a legitimate objective, but one that attracted criticism at the time as representing a diminution of the car's character. Auto Express noted that the practical real-world difference in performance between the 150 brake horsepower and 125 brake horsepower cars was less significant than the numbers implied, because changes in power measurement methodology accounted for part of the apparent reduction. The 125 brake horsepower cars are, in the view of most knowledgeable owners, still entirely satisfying to drive. Section 4. The American market, where the TR6 truly lived. Of the 94,619 TR6s built, 83,480 were exported, almost all of them to the United States. Only 8,370 remained in Britain. That ratio, roughly 10-to-1 in favor of exports, tells you everything about where the TR6 found its audience and what it meant to the people who bought it. For American sports car buyers in the early 1970s, the TR6 occupied a very specific position. It was less expensive than a Jaguar E-Type. It was more powerful and more characterful than the MGB. It offered a straight six engine at a time when every other car in the affordable British sports car category used a four. Its handling, if not the finest of its era, was honest and predictable in a way that rewarded a driver who took the time to understand it. And its exhaust note, that low, distinctive rumble of the 2.5-liter six at speed, was something that no competing car could match at any price near its own. The car attracted buyers who saw themselves in a direct line of succession from the TR2 customers of 1953. They were not, in the main, technically sophisticated enthusiasts who read every road test in every magazine. They were people who wanted an open British sports car, who liked the character it projected, and who were prepared to accept some inconvenience in return for that character. The Lucas injection problems on the rare occasions they occurred on home market cars were, in this context, almost part of the experience, the price of admission to a tradition that valued soul over polish. As the 1970s progressed, however, the American market's regulatory requirements grew steadily more demanding. Each year brought additional emissions equipment, exhaust gas, recirculation valves, charcoal canisters, smog pumps, all of which added weight and complexity while reducing performance. U.S. market cars from the later years of production, particularly the 1975 and 1976 examples, carry a substantial inventory of emissions hardware that stands as a direct record of the legislative pressure that was squeezing the life out of the traditional British sports car formula. The very last TR6, produced on the 20th of July 1976, was equipped with the full 1976 U.S. emissions package, smog pump, charcoal canister, exhaust gas recirculation valve, EGR mileage counter, the entire apparatus. A document of an era ending. Bolted to the back of a 2,498 cubic centimeter straight six that traced its origins to a Standard Motor Company saloon car from 1960. Section 5. The replacement that destroyed the formula. The car that followed the TR6 was the TR7. Introduced to the American market, in 1975 and launched in Britain in January 1976, overlapping with the final months of TR6 production. The TR7 was, in almost every respect, that the traditional TR customer valued, the wrong car. Where the TR6 had a straight six, the TR7 had a four-cylinder. Where the TR6 had rear-wheel drive with independent rear suspension, the TR7 had rear-wheel drive with a live axle, a retrograde step, on any measure. Where the TR6 had an open body as standard, the TR7 was launched, extraordinarily, as a fixed-head coupe, only because British Leyland's management had been advised that American safety regulations might soon ban convertibles altogether. That ban never came. The decision to launch without a convertible option cost the car years of sales in its most important market, and the convertible, when it eventually appeared in 1979, was widely regarded as the car that should have been built from the beginning. The TR7 was styled by Harris Mann and built initially at Leyland's Speke plant in Liverpool, which was chronically afflicted by industrial action. Quality was poor, reliability was poor, and the reputation damage in the United States, Triumph's primary market, was severe. Production moved to Canley in 1978 and then to Rover's Solihull plant in 1980. But neither move solved the underlying problem. The TR7 was a car that its own predecessor's customers did not want. By the time the TR7 was discontinued in 1981, along with the V8-engined TR8, which had been available in very limited numbers and was never sold, officially, in Britain, Triumph's sports car division was effectively finished. The Triumph mark itself was retired by British Leyland in 1984. The Canley factory had been demolished by 1996. The TR6 had not caused this. The TR6 had done everything asked of it. It had sold in extraordinary numbers, it had been profitable, and it had maintained the brand's reputation in its most important market for 7 consecutive years. What ended Triumph was the decision to replace the TR6 with a car that answered different questions about wedge styling and manufacturing, rationalization, and regulatory compliance, while failing to answer the only question the TR customer had ever actually been asking, which was whether the new car would make him feel the way the old one did. The Triumph TR6 was the best-selling TR in the model's history at the time of its production. It was built on a chassis that traced directly back to 1953. It was styled, on a limited budget, by a German coach builder. Its fuel injection system was derided as unreliable by people who had never properly maintained it. And it was described, at its launch, as the last of the real sports cars, a judgment that turned out to be accurate, not as a compliment, but as a prognosis. It was not the TR6 that ended the Triumph sports car tradition. It was the decision, taken by people who should have known better, that what had made the TR6 so loved by its customers was a liability to be overcome rather than a quality to be preserved. The TR7 was a rational response to every external pressure that confronted British Leyland in the mid-1970s. It was also, for the customer who had been buying TR2s and TR4s and TR6s since 1953, almost entirely beside the point. The TR6's legacy is a surviving population of approximately 4,000 licensed examples on British roads, a number that has actually increased over the past decade as American market cars are bought and shipped back to the UK and Europe. For a car of this age, that speaks to the health of the ownership community and the quality of specialist support available. Parts are close to MGB levels of availability. The straight-six engine will cover 120,000 miles without complaint on regular oil changes. Current prices for good right-hand drive examples in the UK have settled in the range of £16,000 to £30,000 for the best cars accessible for what the car delivers, and a value proposition that Autocar's 1969 testers would probably still recognize. Now, we would like to hear your stories. Did you own a TR6, or do you own one still? Did you buy one new, in America, in the 1970s, and drive it as intended? Perhaps you have a view on whether the TR7 deserved its terrible reputation, or whether it was simply the victim of circumstances it could not control. Tell us in the comments. This is a story that the people who were there can tell better than any archive. If this video has been worth your time, please give it a like. It genuinely helps us reach more people who share this passion for the cars that defined British sports motoring. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do that now. We have many more stories ahead. Thank you, sincerely, for watching.